Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Nelson family in Ballycarry. And I just want to give you a wee bit of background about this family and explain to you what we've been doing in terms of DNA in order to tease out the family members and get further with our family research. So the Nelson family of Ballycarry are probably quite iconic because they're the family of the Ballycarry martyr. Now, the Ballycarry martyr was a 16-year-old boy, William Nelson, who was hanged outside his mother's front door in 1798 for his participation in the 1798 rebellion. Now, he was arrested alongside two of his brothers. That was Thomas Nelson and John Nielsen, because they did spell their name Nelson and some spelled it with an I in it. So it was Nelson Nielsen. And the three of them were arrested. Unfortunately, only William was taken into jail and ordered to be hanged. His brothers were then deported. So I think Thomas escaped from the ship, and John went to America, where he then took up a famous job as an architect over there. But they were the children of Samuel Nelson and Jane Haverin, who lived in Ballycarry in a small cottage. And this is the cottage outside which William Nelson was hanged, outside his mother's front door. So after that, then she was evicted from her cottage and she went to live in Island McGee. Now, the story is in some of the books that she went to live with her husband's relatives in Island McGee, but it doesn't seem that way to me. It seems that she went to live with her daughters who were there, or she took her daughters there at the very least. So she did have two daughters, and her two daughters were Isabella and Sarah, that you'll see down here at the bottom. And they were born in the late 1780s. And another thing that we've been able to do so far is we've found one of our Ballycarry testers that went up the mitochondrial line right back to Jane. So we've been able to get the mitochondrial haplogroup of Jane. And that means that if other people from Northern Ireland match that haplogroup, we will know that they are related to that mitochondrial line. So that's a very good thing to have banked at the moment. It hasn't led us to any confirmed matches so far, but I know it will in the future. So it's good to have that. And it's amazing to know that we have the full mitochondrial DNA sample of someone who died in 1821. So that's actually quite amazing within itself. But what we're going to be looking at today is how we have been proving this family and what we've been doing to connect people together. And I'm just going to move on to the next slide to tell you about Sarah. So Sarah was the youngest daughter. She was born around 1788 and didn't die until 1877. We have lots of her descendants traced, and we have found over 20 people that are now tested and in our DNA project, which are who are descendants of her. You can see them at the bottom of this tree. This tree is deliberately small. I don't expect you to be able to read it. You're not going to be able to see it. But up at the top here, we have Samuel Nelson and Jane Haverin. And then we have Sarah. And this is all of the different children that they had. And this is leading down to all of the different testers. So these people at the bottom with these little green dots are people who have done a DNA test who match. And this is what we have found. So you can see how many of our children we have got matches through. So there's one daughter, there's another daughter, there's a son, there's a daughter, and there's another daughter. So this is just all of the different children that she had, and we have got descendants down through all of them. So that means that we're getting a very good sample of her DNA. Now, we didn't go and test these 20 people. Some were by default, some were already there, and some that we had tested, but we tested them for other lines, and they just happened to be descended from Sarah as well. But it means that we have got a database of over 20 people who we can confirm are descended from Sarah. But the one issue is that we don't yet have any descendants of her sister Isabella. Now, if I go back to the previous slide, you will see there was a number of children here. Jackson seemed to have died young. There may have been 2 Jacksons in this family, so we don't know if there's any descendants here. John did have a few children that he left here before he went off to a new life in America, and we haven't been able to particularly identify them yet. We don't know anything about Esther, so we don't know if she married and had children. Thomas escaped, and as far as we know, he didn't have any children. William died at 16, and this is why we're concentrating on these 2 sisters. So we have Isabella and we have Sarah. So just going back to the other slide there, we have no descendants from Isabella yet. So what we're looking for is to try to see if we can prove that these 2 were actually sisters. And in order to do that, we need to have descendants of Isabella identified and tested. So this is what we know about Isabella. We were able to find that she was definitely part of this family, because this is Jenny Jackson. And Jenny Jackson was originally Jenny Hill, and she died in 1911. Now, when she was buried with her great grandparents. So that was Samuel Nelson and Jane Haveron. So she is the child of Sarah Jane Reid, and Sarah Jane Reid is the daughter of Isabella Nelson, who we've been talking about. So because Jenny's in the same grave as her great grandparents, that gives us absolute categoric proof that she was descended from Isabella. So Isabella married John Reid, and she had 2 children, Margaret and Sarah Jane. Now, Margaret died unmarried. There may have been other children that we haven't yet been able to identify, but that's the only 2 we can confirm at the moment. Sarah Jane had 12 children. So this is why this was a very useful person for us. And Jenny was only one of her 12 daughters. So we've built a tree down from Sarah Jane. We built it down beyond the 1911 census, but that's where we got stuck. And we couldn't really just bring this down to the present day. So we have been able to find someone in Island McGee who's been able to help us with a lot of this work. And what she's been able to do is identify the more recent generations of people who still live in that area. And through that, we were able to find a 3 times great grandchild of Isabella. So this would be a 4 times great grandchild of the parents. So we then approached that person, and we were able to test them for our Ballycarry and Island McGee projects. So that was very useful. So now we have our first tester coming down from Isabella, and we want to see if this person matches any of the descendants of Sarah Nelson, who is the potential sister, who we're pretty sure is going to be the sister of Isabella. But a lot of people will say to you that autosomal DNA doesn't reach back this far. So we're now back into the 1700s. And if we go back to where we were a second ago, I can show you on this slide the parents of Isabella and Sarah are Samuel and Jane. And this is taking us back to that couple. So this is where the DNA would originate from, if Isabella and Sarah can be proved to be autosomally connected through DNA. So it's going back to 1717 if the segment comes from their father, and it's going back to 1746 if it's coming from their mother. So that is quite far back, and it's showing a really good reach for autosomal DNA. So we'll just go back to where I was there. Okay, so we're just moving on now from Isabella. So this is the tree of the tester that we identified, who's a descendant of Isabella. So this is Isabella up here, and she married John Reid. And then, as I said, we know who her parents are. This is Sarah Jane Reid, and this is her husband. And this is just coming down the line. So that's what we have. And we were hoping that this was going to work, because this is going to be the 3 times great grandparents, and the 4 times are Isabella's parents. So when we got this, we have to look at the possibilities of what we're going to get whenever we test this person. So Isabella is the 3 times great grandmother of the new tester. Now, as we know, we have 20 testers who descend from Sarah. So that means that the people that are descended from Sarah, it's either their 3 times or their 4 times great grandmother. So when we look at this tree, it means that the closest that this new tester from Isabella can be to the descendants of Sarah is 4th cousin once removed or 5th cousin. So we're quite far out here in terms of autosomal, but we're looking for segments that would match. Now, when you get further out in terms of DNA, you're limiting your chances of getting a match, because although you might be related to all of these distant relatives, you're not guaranteed to share a DNA segment with them. So when we tested this new person, we couldn't guarantee that we would get matching segments with the descendants of Sarah. So we have about a 30% chance, but we have 20 different opportunities to get that chance, because we have over 20 testers descended from Sarah, and with a 30% chance of each one. So when we did that, we had a pretty good idea that we were going to be able to get a match of some description. And when we were moving forward, that's indeed what we got. In fact, we got a better result than what we expected. We found that we had 14 of those 20 people matched. So we had a match between the descendants of Sarah and the one tester that we have now that is descended from Isabella. So this is the matches here, and you can see all 14 of them. I have linked them so you can see the confirmed relationships: 4th cousin once removed, 5th cousin, and some 5th cousins once removed. But one thing you might notice here is quite high figures. And for this 5th cousin, for example, we have 71 units of DNA shared and a longest block of 38. But then there's another 5th cousin here that only has 15 with a longest block of 15. Now, what we would expect at the 5th cousin range is something more in that range there. We wouldn't tend to expect that amount of shared DNA. It can happen, and it can happen on default, but it also points to the fact that something else could be going on here. And that's something that we need to bear in mind. And what I mean is that it may not be reflective of this particular relationship, or it may be reflective of more than one connection between the two testers. Because when you have particularly high amounts, and again, consistently high, because over here we've got a 63, a 71, a 53, and a 55. They all are ringing out slight warning bells for me, because I'm thinking it's a great match, but it may not be purely a Nelson-Haverin connection here. This is more what I would expect to see: 30s, 15s, 21s, 26, 16, and maybe even a 42. But these ones here would concern me because they are slightly higher. So in instances like this, and the reason I'm explaining all this is the type of thing that you can do within your own family tree if you're able to go back to this distance. If you know that your family came from an area where there was a lot of intermarrying, then this is something you have to consider when you're looking at a DNA match. So the way that I approached this was I used the family matching tool on Family Tree DNA. And I know some of you probably heard me talking about this before, and it's always my go-to tool because it really helps you to work with situations like this. So what you do is you go into your tree, Family Tree DNA, and you build out the tree to include the matches in the position to which they're related to you. And then you link them on. And when we did this, this new tester had 9,039 matches. And whenever we linked them all, they were all on the paternal side. And this meant that there was 402 people were identified as potentially being related through this particular Nelson line. Now, again, that's higher than I expected. So when you link somebody on the tree, that automatically updates the matches page. It shows the confirmed relationships and it identifies those people. Now, at the moment, I would say they are potentially Nelson people. And what this is doing is automating a process for the shared segments. It's not shared matches in terms of just people who appear on each other's match lists. It's taking this a stage further, and it's making it more scientific, and it's making it more accurate, because it's comparing segments, not just comparing in common with lists. So we've now got 402 people to look at, and this is the type of match that we were getting at the bottom. So you can see that people are matching each other at the same particular position. So these 14 people who match this new tester, they're not all matching at different spots. There is segments where people are sharing, because you can see on the family tree at the beginning that these 20 matches were all from different parts of the sisters' tree. So they were all coming down from different children. And this is very useful to have that type of a spread. So when we look at those amounts, as I said, some of them did seem a bit high. And what we think is going on is there could potentially be a second ancestral line. And when I looked, in fact, there actually was. There was a second ancestral line, and it was a line through David English and Sarah Hay. And we found that some of the testers were doubly related to our new tester. And this is why they had higher matches. Now, when you look at Blaine Bettinger's chart that you can get on DNA Painter, you can see that the average match for a fifth cousin would probably be around 25, although it can be found to be as far as 117. So that means that, on occasion, you may get matches like this, but it's the consistency of getting higher matches, far higher than what we'd expect. It's more than double. I'm thinking, no, there's definitely something going on. And funny enough, the people that have these higher matches do indeed share this second relationship. So it means that what we have to do now is we have to look at these matches, because the amount of DNA shared is going to represent a double relationship. It could be that all the DNA is coming from the Nelson line. It could be that all the DNA is coming from the English line. But it's probably more likely that we're maybe getting about 30 or 25 from one of them and the difference from the other. So that's probably an amalgamation of two different connections. Now, how can we tell that? And this is where sometimes people say autosomal DNA isn't useful. I would actually counter that and say this is where DNA becomes even more useful, because it allows you to analyze each segment and to see who else is sharing it. So what we can do is we can look at these segments and who matches on these segments to identify which relationship they're coming through and which they are representing. So if you compare this new person with one of their matches, then you may find that they share 3 different segments of DNA. And what we might find is that 2 of the segments are coming from the Nelson connection and 1 is coming from the English connection. And this is what is very useful, because it's really giving you double information. Yes, it's slightly more awkward to work out, but it's potentially a lot more lucrative because you're getting a lot more information out of it. So what I did was I then uploaded all of this information to DNA Painter. So when I said to you, if you just go back to the previous slide, we had 63, 71, 55. We had identified 402 people through the family matching tool. And this is what we have uploaded here. So all of that information has been uploaded into DNA Painter. And what I can now do is start to go through each of these segments and I can see who else shares them. All I have to do is open up this particular chromosome and it will show me a list of all the people who match at that particular point. And then I can identify if that group are through the Englishes as well as the Nelsons. And I can try to figure out which line the match is coming through. Now, I haven't got that process finished yet because this is a relatively new match. And this is what I have been able to do so far. So when you look at this, you can see I've got I've got a little key down at the right hand side here. So what I've been able to find, for example, is that this particular segment here is definitely coming from the Nelson-Haverin connection. There's no doubt about that. But then I've also been able to find that this segment here, this is not coming from the Nelson-Haverin line. This particular segment is coming from the English-Hay connection. And then there's this one down here that I haven't been able to make an assumption on at the moment. I think this is still English-Hay, but I'm not sure. So these ones here, I haven't been able to work with yet, but I will be doing that over the next few days. But it shows you how you can start to work these out and to categorize this and see which ones are coming through which particular relationship. And that's a really effective way of working with your matches. And anyone can do this in your own family when you're working with more distant matches. So as I said, the work on this is ongoing. The segments through the Nelson family can indeed be identified, and we can also identify the segments that are coming through the second connection. Some are going to be able to be consistent, but the really good thing about this is that we have now identified lots of other people who match on these specific segments. So if they do prove to be Nelson, then we can contact those people and we can look at their trees and we can try to grow that particular family line backwards, because we've got a triangulation point that is so far back in the past. So we know that all the people matching in that segment are related to Samuel Nelson and Jane Haverin, who are in the middle of the 1700s. And that's going to potentially be able to take us further back, maybe into siblings, maybe into their parents, and maybe find connections further back. So that shows that autosomal DNA does have a powerful reach and can be a very useful tool for working with these segments. The other really useful thing is that we have another descendant of Isabella Nelson that we have recently identified. They have just been tested and we're expecting results back in a few weeks. Now, the really interesting thing is that they don't have this double connection. So what we'll be able to do is see which segments they share. Now, they're going to be a third cousin once removed of the tester that we currently have that's descended from Isabella. So again, that's quite a distant match, and we'll be looking to see which segments are shared between the two descendants of Isabella. And then we'll also be going to be looking at any segment shared between this new tester and the descendants of Sarah Nelson. And they're all going to be either fifth cousins once removed or sixth cousins. So this is going to help us get clarity, because although we've got 20 from one sister, we've only got one from the other sister. And this is why if we can start to get more testers from this sister, this will give us more to work with and give us more clarity on exactly what is happening with the DNA. But I hope that has given you an idea of how you can work with segments, how you can make assumptions, then how you can work out which line they're coming from, and then how you can move forward by getting new testers. The other good thing that we have found is we have got somebody else who we know is testing at the moment that is descended from David English and Jane Hay. So again, if they match either of these descendants, it's going to help us weed out that second connection and maybe identify some of those segments as coming through the other line as well. So the more people that we can test, the more information that we can get, and the more layers that we can put into the past, which will identify the individuals concerned, but also the connections between them. So, as I said, this is to be continued, and hopefully at a future presentation, we will give you an update on where we've been able to get with this particular session. So thank you for listening, and I hope that's been useful.